Wouldn't it be great to be able to retarget animations in Blender between armatures that are completely different? And wouldn't it also be equally as great to be able to add modular rigging to them? So adding the rigging that you need and that you want, such as IK chains for limbs and legs, head tracking, foot controls, finger controls, and all that kind of stuff. Well, that's what this update of Mr Mannequins Tools is all about. I've put a lot of time into figuring out a good system to do that, and there's still a lot more to be done, but it's much better than everything was before. The whole retargeting system is much better now than it previously was in the last update. The main idea of this whole system is that we're going to be mapping bones to numbers so that we don't have to worry about bone names anymore, and we can interchange animation data and mesh data between these bones, and we can even force their naming if we need to. So I'm going to hop into my preferences here, and where the add-on gets turned on, we have two little menus here. We have Save Retargets and Bone Mapping. I'm going to reset them both to their defaults with these little refresh buttons here. And inside the bone mapping, I'll come back into more detail about this a little bit later on, but for now what we need to know is that this is a three-dimensional array that is holding the indices that we're going to use, the three integers that are going to define which bone maps to which other bone. I could have done this with just a single integer, but I decided to use three so I can feature in mutilation systems, dismemberment systems that will pull out all the bones in a body part by these integer values. So that's what this bone mapping is. It's a way of storing naming and a reference for the integer values that we need to map the bones. Then we have save retargets. These are something you'll only ever have to make once. So I've got the UE4 hierarchy, bone hierarchy here, with each of the original bone names mapped to three indices, as you can see here. And I've also done the same for the Mixamo armature, well, at least the Mixamo armature that someone sent me. I don't actually use Mixamo, but I got someone to send me, very kindly, a Mixamo character that they had downloaded, so I could pull out the bone names and sort of set up a default thing for that. So the retargets you save so that you can reuse a bunch of settings, as well as a bunch of retargeting settings, as well as the integer values mapped to the names. So I can take let's make this a bit bigger. I can take the pelvis, because it's mapped to 1, 0, 0. I can say we want animation from this bone here to be mapped to this bone here, the Mixamo rig hips, in the Mixamo retarget by comparing the data between these two retargets. So this whole system can work independently from the bone mapping. This is useful for slightly more niche circumstances. So realistically, we can just use only the retargets to move animation data around, but having the bone mapping there, I find really useful, and I'm sure a lot of more technically minded people will find it very useful as well. So that's a bit of the how done. Now let's actually do an example with a Mixamo character. Hopefully this is going to show just how easy it can be to move meshes and animations between armatures once you've got one of those retargets set up. So I'm going to go into Mr Mannequins Tools here. I've done a lot of new things to the import menu. Let's pull this out so we can see things a bit better. There should be a link in the description and a card up in the top corner to the video where I explain more about all these options. But for now, I just want to import meshes. I don't want to batch import things. I need to find my test folder, which is there. And I want to select the Mixamo character that I'm going to use for this example. I'm going to add a root bone, and I'm going to want to ignore leaf bones because I already know that this character has leaf bones and we don't really want those. So I'm going to ignore leaf bones and not mess with anything else in that box, but I will tick location and scale here. And then I can import the character. There we have a slightly dodgily weight painted character, so excuse the weight painting when I get an animation onto this. He's not that well weight painted. I didn't make this. But what we've got is we've got our Mixamo armature here. Now, because I've reset the preferences settings here, because I have these reset to default, I already have the retargets and the bone mapping in there to be able to do what I'm about to do. And I nearly forgot, there's something that's a bit strange about this Mixamo character. All of his bones have an integer in their name. They all have a 1 after Mixamo rig, and I'm not sure if other Mixamo characters have this, but some of the ones that I've had experience with did not have any integers there at all. In fact, most of them didn't. So I'm not quite sure why that is, but I'm just going to quickly run a script that has gone missing. So I just had a little bit of a search through some files and I couldn't find the code that I'd written. It's a very short piece of code. I was going to rewrite it, but I just realized I'd actually copied it a moment ago in order to do this. So I can just paste it straight in here. So this is going to go through each bone in the selected pose bone. So I better select them all. Better make sure they're all selected. And if the bone name starts with Mixamo rig 1, we're going to change the bone name to Mixamo rig plus the rest of the bone name. So I'll put this little piece of code in the description in case you need it, but there are a lot of add-ons out there that can handle naming like this for you if you need to rename stuff. If you didn't want to rename this, you'd need to create your own retarget, which I'll show how to do a bit later on in this video. So I can select everything and run this script, and now all the bone names have got rid of that 1, and this example will now work. So back to the layout. We have a build controls button. If you used update 1.2 of Mr Mannequins Tools, this will have been called start rig retargeting. Now it's just build controls. It's better named after what it's actually going to do. It's going to build a bunch of control bones for us, which we can then add my new modular rigging to. So I'm going to click build controls here. Now, if you don't have a template for it, I only have the UE4 mannequin, then you can just generate the bones straight onto it. They won't have custom shapes and you'll have to set up all their own settings, but that would be the starting point for creating a retarget, would be to generate the control bones. But I have a UE4 mannequin retarget that will work with this because I can use I have a mannequin template, not retarget, template retarget. So I have a mannequin template of all of his control bones already set up. I only have the mannequin one. I haven't done the Mixamo one yet. I'm going to, but I plan to rework how the templates get saved and used to make them more performance friendly and make it so that you can save your own templates very easily. So I've selected the mannequin template for this example and the Mixamo retarget that's in my default preferences here, this Mixamo retarget here, so it can map the templates bones to the Mixamo bones. And I can click OK. And then we have the mannequin's bones on the Mixamo character. If I jump into edit mode, you can see that this is a mannequin armature being constrained to our original deformed bones of the Mixamo armature that I imported. There's a whole bunch of options here, and I'm going to come back to those later because we don't really need them right now because all of that data for all of these controls and the options is saved already in the retarget. So we don't need most of this here right now, just for this example. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn off the shapes. I'd recommend you do this while you're retargeting because it's just easier to see what's going on. So I'm going to make sure that's off and that the bones are kind of where I want them to be. So I'm not too happy about this hand position here. So I'm going to turn on its inherit rotation, press the refresh button there, and it will reset all of its children to how they're supposed to be. I think I'm going to do the same thing with these. Can I do a bulk inherit rotation thing with them? Is it Shift W? Deform, inherit rotation. There we go, I just turned them all on. Okay, I can do that to the other side as well. So grab the hand bone, grab these purple bones, and turn back on their inherit rotation because it gets turned off by my script to make sure any template bones appear where they want to. So again, Shift W, inherit rotation, and I need to then refresh the hand bone. These guys don't have any children, so they don't need refreshing. So that we set those finger bones back to where they should be. And now we're ready to apply those controls. Here I want to force the character mesh, so let's switch that back on. There it is. So let's switch that back on. I'm going to want to force this character mesh into the mannequin's rest pose. So from this T pose to the mannequin's A pose, and I want to do that relatively without changing the location of any bones, so we don't get some really stretched out deformation. So when I click apply controls, I'm going to select the mannequin template, and I'm going to select force template rotations. We can force the locations that the template had, but I don't recommend doing that. Most of the time you won't need that. There's only a few situations where you do, but forcing template rotations, forcing just the rotations can be very useful. So that's a thing, and that's there. And then when I press OK, we now have this Mixamo character deformed into the shape of the mannequin, and we can now start messing around with this and adding an animation to it. So let's hide the deformed bones because we don't need those visible, and we can start getting things imported. Yeah, that looks about right to me. The mannequin does have a kind of arch back like that. I could tweak the bones and I could change this however I need to. That's this Mixamo character moved into the A pose. Now, I'm going to do a separate video for the modular rigging to explain that, so let's not go into that there. You can find a card up there and a link in the description to that video as well. So, I want to import an animation. I'm going to directly import, I want to directly import a mannequin animation onto this rig. It now has the correct rotations for the mannequin, so it will be able to take animations that the mannequin uses. So, before I import this, I need to use the bone mapping to set the deform names. Now, I'm going to automate a lot of this, and I'm going to make this a lot more, like this whole system is going to be a lot more streamlined in the future. But for now, I've got this working, and this is sort of the groundwork for it. Setting the deform names, really, I wouldn't necessarily want to change those deform names most of the time. But in order to get animation onto it, right now I've got to set the deform names to the UE4 retargets deform names, and this will just run through and change all of those deform bones names. If I can press the right buttons, change all of those deform bone names, if I can select one as well, to the mannequin bone names from the Mixamo bone names, and I only want to do this temporarily. So that's that bit, and I can turn off import meshes and turn on import animations. Set the animation folder to that same test folder, and we're going to want to add a root bone. We don't need to ignore leaf bones because the mannequin doesn't have any leaf bones. And I'm going to apply everything again, and I definitely don't want to batch import the animations because otherwise that could take quite a long time, as I've upgraded the import script to be a bit more advanced and it takes a lot longer to run on animations now. So let's bring in the third person run animation. Just scale the keyframes and make sure I tick animation to active. So anim to active, and we will import the mannequin's third person run onto this character here. Let's hide those deform bones again. And that should be what I need to do. I'm not going to check this cleanup button, but I will explain what that would have done in a moment. It's good to have this option available so that you can check for errors, so you can troubleshoot any issues you have when importing things. So if you know that it's going to work, you can tick cleanup and it will get rid of some stuff. But I'll do this for now and click import FBX. Now this might take a little while. Like I said, I've updated the animation import script to be a lot more accurate, so it takes a bit longer to run than it did before. I am going to bring back a more performance-friendly version of it that isn't as accurate, but for now, this is what you've got. So there we have the third-person run on this Mixamo character. What have I pressed? I pressed that. There we go. And we're in wireframe. We don't necessarily, let's put it solid. So what cleanup would have done, we would have got rid of this armature and the other armature behind it as well. It would have just deleted those for us because we no longer need them after the animation has been retargeted and remapped onto the active armature that we had selected when we pressed import. So cleanup would delete those, but it's useful to have them come in sometimes as well. So ticking cleanup, these would no longer be here, but I want them there. I wanted them there just to bug check and make sure this was working, which it looks like it is doing. So that looks pretty accurate to me. We've got the 19 frames we're supposed to have. Yeah, that's right, that's about right. So one of the armatures that gets imported is a reference to the transformation that Blender wants to have the armature in. The other one is actually using the animation. So I can go into more detail about that a bit later. So I'm going to delete those for now because we don't need them. And we have the third person run on a Mixamo character. Very straightforward. Let's set the end frame to 19 and we can play through. And then we have third person run on a Mixamo character. Now I can grab this armature and go back into pose mode. My deform bones have been unhidden, so I can rehide those. And I can set the deform names back to the Mixamo names so that it would maintain compatibility with wherever it came from. Although right now it wouldn't be compatible with anything anywhere because it's not in a T pose, it's in an A pose. We've made a new skeletal mesh out of it. But I wanted to show that as part of the example. So there we have animation from the mannequin on a Mixamo character deformed to fit the mannequin's A pose and ready for export to Unreal Engine for a custom character. Before I get into the really nitty-gritty details of actually how to do all the positioning of the bones in pose mode to create the retarget, I want to do a quick example of retargeting animation between two armatures in Blender so that I can show quickly how to create and save your own retarget and just sort of give an example of how this works in most standard use cases. So I'm going to create an armature here. I've got a bone and let's point this down here somewhere and I'll just extrude, keeping everything sort of level on the Y. There, so we've got upper arm, we've got lower arm, and we've got a hand bone as well. So I'm not going to rename any of these, but I do want to make sure that none of them are connected. I don't usually use connected bones. I find it very counterproductive. I often like to be able to move my bones around the place, so I tend to just always have my bones disconnected, and I haven't really found a reason to keep them connected yet. Like doing the stuff I do, I just haven't found a reason for it. And most of my retargeting doesn't really like connected bones. Strange things may happen if your bones are connected to each other and they have a different hierarchy to the animation we're trying to retarget to it. So that's a thing. I don't really like connected bones, and my code certainly does not like connected bones. So they don't want to be connected. And these are out of form. These are going to be out of form mode. So let's make this interesting. I'm not going to rename them. And let's rotate them to point in all sorts of strange and crazy directions. Much like the mannequin's deformed bones. All pointing all over the place with different bone rolls and all that kind of stuff. So none of them really have the same main axis going on there. So let's build the controls on this, and then I can show how to save a retarget with it. So we're going to pose mode, and I'm going to build controls on this, making sure I've got generated and that I don't have a retarget in there. So we're going to generate a new template as opposed to using the UE4 one that I did have. I'm going to click OK, and this is where it thinks these bones should be. This is what it thinks this armature should look like. Now, it's usually a good idea to work in the order of the hierarchy of bones. So I'm going to position these in such a way that I can animate them in Blender like so. I'm just going to sort of line up the rolls manually like this. I mean, I could come into edit mode and do this a bit more precisely, but I don't really want to. You shouldn't really need to. You can kind of get things looking just about right. If you need to, you can check which axes are pointing in which direction and get everything lined up to be using the same ones if you want them to. So let's have these guys using, I've got snapping on. Let's have these guys using the same axis there like that. you're all X pointing in, and we'll tell you to inherit rotation, or let's not do that, let's just leave you how you are. And rotate this into a position we can animate with, like so. I really want that a bit more. There we go. It's a bit better. Okay, so now I've done that. I could, if I wanted to, start doing the retargeting process during the retargeting process. So I could set up all the integers and the animation translation stuff now, but I prefer to do it after I've applied controls. So again, generated, nothing in here for a generated armature, and click OK. And now we have control bones, turn off those axes, that are moving our strangely shaped deform bones, our strangely oriented deform bones. So just like the mannequin, just like my trick for the mannequin that means we can manipulate him in Blender without ever touching the original bone positions. So here we have an arm. Now we need to save a retarget. So we're going to copy across the relevant bone numbers to the relevant bones on this little arm that I've made. So we've got 140 for the clavicle. Let's get both armatures into pose mode here. 140 clavicle. So 140. You can see my mapping names popping up here as we put the integers in. It will automatically find that, so you can see what you've got it mapped to. It's another useful thing of having the bone mapping there, is you can see what you're mapping to what. Again, I'll come back to the bone mapping and how it works a little bit later on. And then this bone here, upper arm is 300, 300. I think the lower arm is 301, or 310. 310, and the left hand in my mapping system is 321. 321 retarget. -1 in these numbers here means that it's not assigned. But again, I'll come back to that. So -1s might cause problems, but it shouldn't be too bad. It should just ignore them. Ignore it if it's got a -1 and do something else with it. So we can now that we've retargeted this, so each of these indices matches up. So each of these integers is the same across the bones that we want to move animation between. We could just start retargeting the animation now if we wanted to, or we can save this retarget. So if I click save retarget data, let's make sure we only have this armature. If I click save retarget data, we can do a new retarget, or we can overwrite an existing one. So we could overwrite or add to an existing armature there, or we can say new retarget with the name, let's call this test, and click OK, and we've saved that as a retarget. If I go into my add-on preferences, let's make this a bit bigger so we can actually see it. We've got test, and we have those bones with their equivalent settings in there. So let's talk about these settings very quickly. So this is retargeting translation. If you've ever used Unreal Engine, retargeting translation is a way of telling bones to not use certain keyframes. And that's essentially what this does here, except it just won't read them at all. It never puts them on instead of limiting them. So skeleton means we are only going to take rotational and possibly scale keyframes. We won't touch location keyframes. Setting it to animation, you'll get location keyframes on that bone. So skeleton means no locational changes, animation means locational changes. Same as in Unreal Engine. I will add in the rest of the Unreal Engine options for this, because there's like orient to scale and a few other settings that I'll be able to figure out, and I'll be able to add in here. But for now, most of the time, I only need these two settings, so they're what's there for now, and I'll add more when I can. It also saves how the bone was saved, so what retargeting method, and I'll come back to each of these methods after I finish this example. So we've saved the retarget, it's there. If we want to update the add-on, there's an issue in that if you turn the add-on off, all your custom retargets here will get deleted. So you need to a way to save them, which we have here. So if we click write, this will write all of our retargets, so everything in here, to a script file in your blend that you can then run to re-add. So let's do a quick example of that. So I've deleted it, or I've turned the add-on on and off. We no longer have any retargets in here. There's nothing in there for us to use. I can run this script and it brings back everything that we just had in there. Yeah, so that works fine, Dandy. You need to remember to save between updates. I would like to find a better way of doing this, but this is what I've come up with for now, and it works. So beggars can't be choosers. So that's that bit done. Trying to think where I'm at, what I need to do. Now we need to retarget the animation. So we've mapped all the bones to the integers, blah, blah, blah. I've just explained that. Now I can select the source armature, the source of the animation, select the target of the animation, and go back into pose mode with both of them. And I can click retarget animation. This is wrong. I should probably change the code so that it tries to figure out what it should be. That should be armature retarget. So the source is the armature retarget. The target is the armature retarget.001, the little arm that I made. We've mapped all the bones together using the integer values, and if I click OK, we'll end up looking like this. But when we come back, when we start playing the animation, there we have the arm doing what it would do in its own relative space. So what this has done is it's taken the rotations that the bones in, let's hide deform bones. It's taken the rotations that these bones are doing and transferred them to the local space of these bones here. This hasn't accounted for the difference in the rest pose, so it's not completely accurate, and all of these bones had skeletal translation on, so they're not going to be picking up any location keyframes, although there aren't actually any locational keyframes here because this bone itself is set to skeleton. So yes, I've done my best to explain this. I think that's about all I need to cover for retargeting the animation. It works. It's doing what we want it to. It's moved everything into local rotational space. You'd probably need to fix this. If you're doing this properly, you'd need to fix each keyframe so that this is in the right place. I also want to add in a cleaning keyframes thing that will delete any unnecessary keyframes that don't really, where the animation curve would continue to do what it was supposed to, we'll get rid of keyframes so that you won't have it being keyed on every single frame, if you don't want to, but that will be a separate operator in another update. So yeah, we have an arm doing what this other arm is doing in a relative way. It's not perfect and it doesn't account for the differences in rest pose, but I'm going to work on that and figure out the best way to implement applying the difference in rest pose to this armature so it moves exactly as this one moves. Then I'm also going to bring back the more performance-friendly way of doing it. The same as with the performance-friendly import, it's using the same code. I'm going to bring back a more performance-friendly way of doing it because, again, doing this retarget animation, this can take a little while to do. It can take a little while to do if you've got a lot of bones and a lot of keyframes. So yeah, that's retargeting animation and how to save and reload a custom retarget that you might make yourself. Now let's get into the real nitty-gritty details of actually doing the retargeting and what all the controls do and how they work. But while we're on the subject of saving retargets, I want to quickly jump into this mapping system here and explain a little bit more about how the naming works. So obviously this is a three-dimensional array, like I said. So let's pick an arm here. That should be L. I've just tweaked it because this is the third time I've tried to record this bit because it's a bit of a mouthful to explain. So what we have is bits of the bone names. Okay, so we have the body part is the top layer, then we have the joint here, and underneath the joint we have the part, okay, the section. So we have part, joint, sections. So each part can have however many joints in it, like the arm here has a bunch of joints, and each of these joints has its sections. Now the way the naming gets pulled out of this is a little bit complicated to explain, but I'm going to do my best. So currently this bone here, this is the upper arm, 300. Arm, shoulder, humerus, L. Okay? So if I just add some stuff in here, if we just put shoulder 01 and let's put an R in there, and then we just put test in here and something in there. So now what's going to happen when we try and rename with this is when we go to rename it, in fact I can show in a moment what will happen. So when we go to rename this, we have what's happening is we're going through and we're going through each of these sections, each of these affixes in order. And these three on the end here get checked to see if they are L or R. If they are L or R, upper or lowercase, then we save them and they get sort of removed. It takes priority from the body part and then priority to the joint, then priority to the section. So right now, this would get ignored because we have L up here in the arm. So this would then read arm, shoulder, 01, humerus, test, something, L, which I can show. Like I said, this is a little bit complicated to explain, but it does need explaining. So if I minimize that quickly, if we come into here, which is the end of the rig that I was messing around with, let's hide him, and let's load up the original Mixamo one here. If I selected the upper arm R, which was the bone I was tinkering with there, is that the one I was tinkering with? We have 300. Okay, so that's left. So this one here, there we go. You can see arm, shoulder, 01, humerus, test, something, L. That's how the name's coming through. This is so difficult to explain. So as I change this in here, this value in here, which is the bone we're tinkering with to explain this overly complicated but very necessary system, if I was to change this something to L, it's getting ignored. If I change it to R, it's getting ignored because we have L up here. So this goes in priority of the hierarchy for the left and right suffix because it always wants to go on the end so that we can mirror stuff in Blender happily. So if I was to change this to test demo, it's then going to read, instead of having an L on the end, it's going to have an R because the next part down, the joint has got an R suffix, but the upper arm, the body part no longer has a suffix. As you can see, R on the end there. Then if we change this to not be an L or an R, if I change this to L, it becomes L. If I change it to R, it becomes R. If I turn it to something, it gets rid of it, and I need to stretch this out for you to see. Oops, deselected the bone. You can see it's now finally turned to L. Let me get back my preferences. It's now finally turned back to L because we don't have a pre-existing end suffix to use. So otherwise, everything gets accumulated throughout this name. So arm underscore test underscore demo, shoulder, 01 something, humerus test, then L. Okay? But these last three boxes get checked to see if they are L or R, as it is here. And if it is R, then we ignore anything that's L or R underneath it in these three boxes. I need to keep repeating this so that everybody understands this bit, because when you if you do want to use this mapping system, you're going to need to understand that that's how it works. So let's actually delete this mapping system for a moment and explain that you can create your own, and you don't necessarily have to do all of this retargeting and all this stuff using my built-in defaults. You can add and create your own. So you could do it all in this menu. I find it much easier to set up the retargets in using an armature in front of me visually. which is why I recommend doing that. And there's also a few little bugs if you need to change the parenting. So it's better to do that outside of this, but just for showing how this works, I'll do this bit quickly. So let's add in a section. Say we don't actually want to use a three-dimensional array. We only actually want to use one integer. We want one integer to define this. We can just say bone something and then give it a suffix, whatever. Or you could have everything all in one thing. It doesn't really matter if you're going to do it this way. So like this could be test bone. So you can name your bone however you want using this. Just making sure you put your left and right suffixes in this box here, because it will accumulate to the right. Now, when we add a retarget, so I've added a retarget, let's add a bone to that retarget. I can simply set this to the number that corresponds there. So I don't actually have to use all three dimensions. You can use however many dimensions you want. You just leave these as -1. You just leave these as -1, it should still pick it up and it all should still work, like on a retargeting and an animation perspective. And it should also rename the bones correctly as well. So if I come into here, let's grab my root. It now says bone test, bone out, as you can see. So all the renaming will still work. We don't have to use all three integers. We can just set this to 0 and minus. If this was -1 and -1, yeah, you can see this works. You don't have to use all three layers of this. You only have to use the first layer if you want to. If you do want to use only one layer or only two layers, because you could do this with two layers as well, the same theory applies, then you will need to create everything from scratch custom yourself. I can only support what I use in this situation because it takes a fair little time to go through and do all of the default stuff. So that's what you'd have to do. If you want to use just one thing, you'd have to add in all the bones, give them all naming that you want. And the same goes to the retarget here. You'd have to add in all the bones in the order that their hierarchy goes in. You have to add them all in and give them the mapping that you want them to have. You could just use one int all the way down. So this could be 1, and yeah, that's how it works. Okay, I just needed to go through that quickly. It's really difficult to kind of explain what's going on here. It's very much like I can read the code that I've written, but explaining what it actually does is a bit of a pain because it's kind of complicated. I mean, realistically, this shouldn't be a 3-dimensional array. This should be a 6-dimensional array, but I thought that would be way too hard for everybody else to figure out and use, and it's kind of annoying for me to use myself anyway. So I kind of compacted it down into a 3-dimensional array with a bunch of sections that you can put the naming in that you want to have. So you can change all of these names in here. That makes no difference to me at all. Like, change all of these names to be whatever you want. And you can change all of these numbers to be relevant to what you're actually doing. As long as the bone names match up with the armature names here, it should be fine. And if you are going to do things in this menu here, make sure you give the bone the correct name, let's just say pelvis, before you add in a child to it, because once you add in a child, if you change the name of the parent, the child disappears from the menu and you can't edit it anymore, but it doesn't actually get deleted. That's kind of my fault, and I don't have time to fix it before I release this, but I'm going to be working on improving that and making it better too. So that is what I need to explain about the mapping and the retargeting. So for a more detailed explanation of what to do when you're retargeting your own custom character, I'm going to actually use the mannequin himself. So I've navigated to the mannequin FBX folder where I have a freshly exported mannequin FBX. I'm going to add a root bone to it and leave everything else as it is and import the FBX. And there we have the mannequin as he should be in Blender. Oops, I want that armature there. So I'm going to hide his meshes because I don't really need them for this example. So say this was a custom character that we've imported and we need to create a retarget for it because we haven't got one, because there isn't a preset for it. I would come into, actually let's get rid of the empties. We don't need those empties. We can delete those. And let's come into pose mode, build controls, generated. I could use the UE4 retarget here and it would set up all of the stuff for me. but that's just because these bones are named in the way they are. But I'm not going to do that, I'm just going to generate it to show how you would do this to a custom character. Now this might get a little bit long, but I'll try and be as quick as possible with it. This video is long enough already. So, we've started building the controls here. And let's hide that, we don't need it. Oh, no, we do want that there. So this is the control bone for, so these are the control bones for the IK targets. I'm not going to worry about those for this example because it'll take a little bit too long. Let's hide them for now. I'll come back to them maybe shortly. So let's hide these bones here. So everything's kind of imported, but things aren't looking quite right for us to animate with. All the purple bones are pointing in the same way that they were pointing on the defaults. And we've only got these stretch bones. So all these yellow bones here are bones that think they know what they're doing. They are using stretch to constraints in order to force them to point towards their single child. So stretch bones are bones that have either a single child, so we know they're going to want to point that way, or they have two children and one of the children happens to be a twist bone. Then they choose the child that is not the twist bone to stretch to, in the case of the limbs here. So that's what these stretch to bones are doing. Now we can change how these bones are being put into position. So this hand bone here is going to want to remain manual, but I'm going to tell it to, do I want it inheriting rotation? Let's not have it inherit rotation. And we'll rotate this to a position it can be animated with. And click refresh, and that pops everything back into place. We may as well tell the fingers to inherit rotation, like I did before, just so that they do what they're supposed to. So get the hands into position first. Get this hand into position as well. There's probably some specific rotation I should do here, but I'm really not too worried. Let's go to the normal orientation and rotate it round. So it's kind of pointing, so it's got the right sort of bone roll. I'm not quite happy with this one yet either. So let's refresh that and refresh that. Now they're not exact, so I can mirror the pose across. That should have worked. It appears to have got a bit confused there. We refresh it. Yeah, well, we can mirror it all across anyways. Oh, they're not, these aren't inheriting rotation, that's why they're pointing like that. Okay, grab these guys, W, inherit rotation. You can see there's a lot of fiddling around in this sort of mode, in this sort of stage. There's quite a lot of fiddling around to be done, but once you've done it, you can do the whole saving of the retarget afterwards, and you can just reuse it, and all of the settings all of the positions and all of the settings you use on this generated template will be saved, so you can reuse them and then just tweak them on a new armature afterwards, if it has the same bone names. So, Spino 3, we actually want this to be a stretch bone. We don't want it to just be pointing off like that. So we'll set this to stretch. I'll explain what stretch bones are. Manual bones speak for themselves. You manually orient them. Stretch bones, you define a sub-target for it to stretch to. This would be neck. This would be the neck bone here. This would be neck 01, and click refresh. Now it's a stretch bone, and it's refreshed the orientation of the other bones below it as well. So maybe we'd want to, do we want this to, no. When they are children of stretch bones, often inherit rotation is not a good thing to have here. May as well tell that to inherit rotation. And the pelvis, again here, we want to set this to a stretch bone, and the target would be the first spine. First spine bone, refresh, there we go. And the lower arm twist. What have we got here? We've got twist hold. Let's do twist hold bones first. So upper arm twist. We're going to want to set this to twist hold. Now a twist hold, there are a few different ways that people use twist bones. Generally for the upper arm here, we'll be using what I would call a holding twist bone. So it holds back the deformation at the head of the bone, so that the shoulder doesn't, the top of the shoulder doesn't deform as much with the rest of the upper arm. So that's what that does, and I'm going to give this a sub-target of the upper arms of the upper arm itself. This will make it target its tail, and I'll click refresh. That should now be a twist bone that we can't really see unless we do. No, you don't want to go invisible on for me, do you? I go wireframe. There we go. Now we have a twist bone here, and it's oriented to point towards the tail, which is where we want it to anyways. Now it's not quite in the right position. As you can see, it's slightly offset there. So what I'm going to do is set this to active element and on normal, and I want to put snapping on. I'm going to go G, Y, move it along its normal Y axis to snap into the head of its parent, the upper arm bone there. So that's the upper arm twist. Lower arm twist. So this is the opposite of a holding twist bone. This is a twist follow. It follows the deformation, follows the Y rotation, follows the twisting rotation of the hand. So it's causing the deformation to follow a child or follow a bone that's in front of it. So it causes the deformation at the tail of the bone to follow another bone's rotation. That's what twist follow does. So this is going to be the left hand, and we'll click refresh, and it is currently doing it, but it's not quite how we want it. So I'm going to rotate this to be pointing more directly at the hand so that I can animate with it a bit better. We could leave it like that, it would work, but we won't do that, and I'll scale it down to sort of just get this rotated in just the right position, and it's going to maintain the correct Y rotation for me no matter what direction it's pointing. That's why this needs to be set here. Like, these twist bones have really specific orientation for their rigging in order for them to actually work. So this twist hold bone here is very dependent on the Y rotation of this bone here. It needs to fit it. It needs to be perfect. Otherwise, when you turn on the twist bone constraint, it will deviate from its rest pose, which isn't what you want. Ideally on a rig, when you turn off the constraints and then you turn them on again, you don't want to see anything move. Then you have everything set in its rest pose. Its constraints are relative to the rest pose, and it's just it makes for much smoother animating without having to worry about so many things going wrong. So yeah, that's that twist bone. That's currently on manual, and we want the toe bone to be manual. In fact, we want the foot bone to be manual as well. If we clear its rotation, just check that that's doing what it's supposed to. Yeah, so we'd want that to be manual as well. Rotate it on its on its Z axis there, so that it's pointing down, and then refresh. Although we don't really need to worry about that too much, because I've got some code that will fix this to point down anyways, because this bone needs to be pointing down and this toe bone needs to be pointing forwards for my foot controls to work. So I don't really need to worry about that too much. Okay, now the bones that I hid at the beginning, because I needed to explain a little bit more about the IK bones, they have some slightly different settings. So we have two settings here, root copy and IK default, and we have remove as well if you want to remove the bone from the armature. When we apply the controls, you can also remove the bone from the armature if you really need to, but most of the time you shouldn't have. If you're generating the rig, there'll be no bones that you need to remove. The only time that things ever get removed are when you're using a template and the armature that you are retargeting using the template doesn't have bones. The armature doesn't have bones that the template does have. Yeah, then we would need to remove those bones. So you can set these to remove. Root copy and IK default, these are settings to define specific bones. They don't actually have any constraints. You would set these up like you'd set up a manual bone. So if you wanted this control to be the same as the hand bone, you do whatever you want with it. I mean, yeah, you don't want to change these locations, but by all means, change their rotation however you want them to be. Add constraints to do that for you so you get things precise. Like I could do a copy rotation on, what is this called? This is called root retarget. I could tell this to copy the rotation of the hand bone like that if I wanted to, and do it in world space, keep it like that. So you can add in your own constraining here to make things work. You just want to be careful you don't mess with the locations of the bones unless they are twist bones where you need to. So let's go through this again on the leg. Well, I'll do that in a moment. I'll finish explaining about the root copy bones. So root copy is designed to be saying, hey, this is the root of the IK of the hand IK, or this is the root of the foot IK, because you often have these bones in armatures. And IK default is saying, hey, this armature's got these IK bones, we're going to want to do something with them, but what you do with them is really up to you, so there's not too much I can do about that. You may want to even just remove them altogether by setting them to remove, but generally it's a good idea to keep them in there. So yeah, root copy bones are bones that want to, it's just telling us that this is an IK root, or a bone that's going to pretty much mimic the root motion, unless it's giving the root something. It's doing something with the root. And IK default is saying, hey, it's a default IK bone that came with that armature. So that's why they are in there, and they may do more things in the future, but right now they don't actually do anything. They're just labels. They're just for labeling. So that's that. Now let's go through these twist bones again, because these are the only bones you should really be moving. This is a twist hold bone. So we'll do that and click. And the target is going to be the tail of the thigh bone. Thigh L, refresh. And I need to move it on its local y-axis up to the thigh itself. So in normal space of the bone with active element selected, I can do that quickly, and I can do the tail follow with the calf bone there to the foot. Hair rotation, no, we don't want that. Shape, blah blah blah, that's all good. And refresh. Now you'll notice that if I rotate this on its normal Y, you see it's copying the Y rotation. Okay, that's all we really need it to do. Right now it's pointing the wrong way, so it won't deform the leg correctly. This needs to be pointing straight down towards the foot there. I'm scaling it in as well. It doesn't necessarily need to be scaled. And we could add a damped track constraint here to make this a bit easier as well. Targeting the foot, like so. Do a damp track, or we could use a stretch 2 constraint. You could do whatever you want, really. You can tell it to do whatever you want with the constraints. We want it pointing at the head, following the y-axis of this bone here. So that's set that up. And now I can click apply controls, and this will be ready for rigging. So that's the examples I needed to go through here. So we've got all these settings here, all these different ways of, all these preset ways of retargeting bones for different purposes. And if you want to know what they're doing to figure out how to do it yourself manually or however you want, they've all got constraints. You can add your own constraints on, and you can really do whatever you want in pose mode to get an armature that's animated, that's easily animatable in Blender for you. So that's the idea with that. You just don't really want to be changing any locations, with the exception of these twist bones. Now the reason I can change these twist bones locations is because I'm only moving them on one axis. I'm moving them directly on this y-axis up here. So when this twist bone does its twisting motion, it's going to manipulate the actual deformed twist bone in such a way that it's going to rotate correctly and deform the mesh how we want it to. So rotating in the future, rotating this on the y-axis here, holding the well, it won't be rotating on the y-axis, so it'll be holding that deformation back as this bone moves here, which is what we would want. So yeah, if you are going to move things around away from their original points of rotation, you need to make sure you're moving them very specifically on very specific axes to achieve the deformation you want. Really, if you aren't too confident with rigging in Blender, then I would suggest not really doing this stage much at all. Just do what I've done here and you should be fine, and try not to add too much that you don't understand. The simpler things are, the easier they are to manipulate afterwards, and the less that can go wrong. So yeah, if you're confident with Blender and Blender animation, then you can just do your thing. You will want to move these twist bones, but otherwise don't change any locations. And that is that. So I hope you found this informative and you don't have too many troubles using this retargeting system. It should work just as I say it does, and you can always get hold of me in the Mr Mannequins Tools Discord server, which there is a link to below. And I need to give a massive thank you to these amazing people up here, my patrons. They are great, they support me. Without them, I wouldn't be able to put half as much time into this add-on as I currently do. The more people that become patrons, the more time I can put in, the better content you're going to get, and the better the add-on will progress. So thank you for watching, and I hope everybody that asked me for a guide in the last update is thankful and comes and likes this video, because it took a bit of effort to record this, I can tell you.